Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a crazy psycho neighbor was jealous of my kid and kidnapped my baby from kindergarten. She claimed that she owns my child. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. Adoption. It's something that I knew I would partake in from the age of 15. Whenever anyone mentioned my future and having kids, that is where my mind would go. To adoption. When I was 25, I met Josie. We met at work, both of us working for Google, me a software developer and her an intern. Sparks flew immediately, and before we knew it, a year had passed and we started dating, and then another 4 years marriage. And then, when we were 3 years into our marriage, we adopted a baby boy who we named Chris. Before the adoption, we moved into a new neighborhood and got out a mortgage on a very nice house. Both of us had many promotions with Google by this point and could afford to live rather luxuriously. Said neighborhood, as we discovered, had a very strict homeowners association group. The woman who was the president of the group lived on the other side of the neighborhood, and from the get-go, we began having our issues. "Hi, I'm here to welcome you to the neighborhood," she spoke in a cheery tone as I opened the door to greet her for the first time. "Let's call her Karen, you will see why." "Oh, thank you, I've just moved here with my partner," I replied, happily accepting the pecan pie she was holding, excited to have such friendly neighbors. "I would also like to give you this. It's just the guidelines that we all stick to, just to ensure our neighborhood looks lovely." She handed me a flyer with HOA on it. It's a common thing over here that neighborhoods have these, so this was not much of a concern to me, and I did have a feeling they would have one, considering how neat and tidy all of the other houses are. "Once we finished unpacking, we'll be sure to get started on the garden work," I said with a smile as I read the first page about the front lawn, the grass height and flowers, etc. "Thanks so much. Is your husband home?" she asked. "Oh, no, I don't have a husband," I replied. "Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. Cohabitation of non-married couples is becoming the norm, is it not?" She smiled, clearly not getting what I meant. But she did when Josie came to the door saying, "Who is it?" "You two are not married, are you?" Karen replied with a shaky voice. "We are. Is that gonna be an issue?" I stared at her as she began widening her eyes. Probably. You're kinda always causing issues, saying we are not woke enough or something. There should be a rule in there prohibiting this." She poked the flyer as she said that last part, and then turned and stormed off, turning her head around as she did so. "And that grass better be cut when I next see you." Me and Josie shared a look as if to say, "Oh no." All I could hope was that the rest of the neighborhood were not at all like her. I told Josie about the rest of the conversation and how she was perfectly sweet before learning that we were lesbians. It was not difficult to figure out that she was a homophobe a couple of months into moving in, and Chris was finally able to come home. We had never been more happy than the day he was officially ours and in our arms. The months leading up to it were occasionally uncomfortable with Karen. For a while she would find every little thing she could pick on and make it our issue. The flowers are not tall enough, read the handbook. The paint is peeling, read the handbook. You're too loud at night, read the handbook. The last one made no sense because the night in question was a night we were not even home. She might have well just said, "No lesbians, read the handbook." Even still, we didn't want trouble, so we smiled and nodded and just let her be. She eventually calmed down after a while, but when she got news that we now had a baby boy, things changed. We assume one of our other neighbors told her in one of their meetings, and probably not in a malicious way. All of the other neighbors have been nothing but, well, neighborly since we arrived. The first time she called around after hearing the news was with the police. "Karen, what's going on? Why is the police here?" I asked, shocked and angry at the smirk on her face. "We just want to ask you a few questions. We hear you have a new baby," one of the officers asked, and my face paled as I realized what she had done. "It's kidnapped, sir. They are gay. They cannot have a baby." Karen spoke up, feigning terror. "We adopted him, thank you very much," I remarked. Before anyone could reply, we let the officers inside so they could see our adoption paperwork. "Not you, though," I stated to Karen as she began putting her foot through the door. She pulled a sour face, which I simply shut the door on. Not even 10 minutes later, and everything was cleared up. The police went on their way, leaving a very angry Karen on our doorstep. "That poor child needs a mother and a father," Karen tutted before storming off once more, kicking over a gnome on the grass. Me and Josie went inside to talk about what had happened. Both of us were in quite a state afterwards. It was not a nice experience to have someone questioning your family, as I'm sure you can imagine. "Is everything okay over here?" I heard through the door and opened it to reveal the sweet old lady who lived next door. We let her in and explained everything that had happened. She had watched the encounter from her window. She was easily the nicest neighbor we ever had and loved to come around to fuss over Chris. She even offered to babysit whenever, which was handy when we both worked late and couldn't pick him up from nursery. For the next couple of weeks, Karen kept calling around saying anything and everything that was homophobic or just plain ignorant of our situation. We never thought she would go this far. However, one Monday, we dropped off Chris at kindergarten/nursery and everything felt normal. We ended up having to stay late at work because the office was doing some migration to a different processor and all hands on deck were needed to secure the files. We rang the lady who lived next door and asked if she could collect Chris and watch him for a few hours. She was delighted to hear that and said she would go straight away. But half an hour later, we got another call. "He's not here," she yelled down the phone. "They are saying he's gone missing." "What?" I have shouted down the phone. "Miss, you need to get her straight away. We're not sure what has happened. He hasn't been counted back in from playing outside. Nobody else has come to collect him." One of the caregivers picked up the phone to say this. I barely even heard the rest as me and Josie had already ran out of the building and into our car. I nearly crashed multiple times on the way. The only thing I could think about was our sweet boy and what danger he was in. If you're a parent, I'm sure you will understand the feeling of pure terror as the possibilities of what happened swarm around your head like a wasp nest. Once we got there, the police had already been called and a search party was out. "Is there anyone you know would take him?" the police asked. I was crying hysterically and that's when Josie suddenly spoke up. "Yes," she looked at me and I knew straight away who she was referring to. We all raced to Karen's house, us in the police car as they knew we were not fit to drive. Our neighbor, bless her, was so worked up she had convinced herself that it was her fault and that if only she had gotten there a few minutes earlier. We of course assured her the best we could that it was not her fault and resent her we would not. We heard it, the crying of a baby. The police barged through the door and stormed all over the house until we found Karen huddled in a chair with our baby boy in her lap. I felt so relieved that we had found him. It could have been so much worse. "Slowly hand us the child," the officer demanded, placing his gun on the floor. "I'm his real mother. These two horrible women flew from England where we all lived with my baby. They are only living here to avoid jail time." Karen sounded hysterical and it was at this point when a teenage boy came downstairs. "Mom, what's going on here?" he asked, eyeing the baby. "You already have a son. Why do you want ours?" I demanded. "He's not yours," she began. "Mom, this has to stop. You've been obsessed with them for too long. I don't even recognize you anymore. Give them back their baby." The son looked in a mix between anger, hurt and confusion. Karen loosened her hold on the baby as she stared down at her son with a guilty expression. The police quickly snatched Chris and handed him to us. Karen stayed silent as handcuffs were placed on her wrists and she was led into a cop car. We watched as she drove off. Her son also went with them. She ended up getting 15 years for kidnapping a child and of course she got a permanent restraining order on us too, plus our baby, and she would never be allowed to step foot in this neighborhood again. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm honestly speechless. This Karen went so far, I'm really shocked at what must be going on in her head. Let's hope she will never bother OP again. And honestly, people who kidnap children, in my opinion, should get even more than 15 years. Anyway, let's continue with the next one, which is an Am I the A-hole story. My daughter Ruby is 12. Recently she has gotten into the original Star Trek show as well as the Next Generation. Ruby is also a big reader and has started to collect a few of the old Star Trek books that she finds in used bookstores and thrift stores. These books usually cost anywhere from 50 cents to a couple of dollars. My nanny, Tessa, female 22, hangs out with Ruby most days after she gets out of school. Tessa has been our nanny for over a year now and she and Ruby get along great. Tessa is big into thrifting and will often keep an eye out for the books Ruby wants. This is not typically a problem and Ruby always pays Tessa back for the books using her allowance. The problem occurred when Tessa went on a family vacation out west. Apparently she went thrifting during this trip and found some books for Ruby. She texted Ruby asking her if she wanted the books and Ruby said yes. Well, Tessa returned yesterday with a stack of about 35 books and told Ruby they cost 50 bucks. Ruby does not have this much money and told Tessa. Tessa then asked me if I would cover the cost. I said no, as Tessa had never asked me about buying Ruby the books, nor was I aware of the conversation between the two of them. Tessa got upset and I asked Ruby to show me the text, which made no mention of price or even the amount of books she was buying. Tessa only said that she found some books for Ruby. Ruby is on the autism spectrum and doesn't read between the lines. You have to be very literal with her. Previously, Tessa has never bought Ruby more than 1 or 2 books at a time, so I told her that she could have clarified with Ruby regarding the amount or double-checked with me before purchasing and that I would not be paying the $50. Tessa said she couldn't return the books because they came from the thrift store. I stood firm in my decision and reiterated that she should have asked me first. Tessa left and Ruby is now very upset. I know Tessa is a student and does not have a ton of money, so am I the a-hole for not paying Tessa for the books? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for not paying Tessa or not? Comment number 1, sometimes it's better to salvage an important relationship than to be right. Pay for the books, let Tessa know that you cannot do so in the future though, without talking about it. Tell her how much you appreciate her thoughtfulness now and always. Comment number 2, you are the a-hole, Jesus, you're stingy. You are blessed with a very thoughtful nanny who thinks of your child even when she's not at work. There was a misunderstanding about the cost. All you had to do was behave decently, was pay her and ask her to please confirm amounts with Ruby in the future, and that if it happens again you won't be able to pay for it. Comment number 3, everyone sucks here. Tessa for not double checking that you would cover the $50 for your own daughter to read, and you for not covering a lousy $50 for your own daughter's reading passion. If I were you, I would suck it up and pay the $50 stat, or someone is going to scoop up your really thoughtful nanny very soon. I'm thinking of hiring her and I don't even have kids at home. I just want someone to thrift books for me. Update edit, because some people are asking, I'm a single parent to Ruby and while $50 will not make or break the bank, it's definitely an unexpected expense. I provide Tessa with an extra amount of money each month to spend on whatever she wants to do with Ruby, movies, the mall, etc. If she wanted to spend this fund on books for Ruby, that would have been totally fine, but she had already used it up. Edit. I definitely didn't expect this post to blow up overnight. I'm gonna add more context. For those of you who are asking how I can afford a nanny for Ruby and still have $50 be a large unexpected expense, I don't pay for Tessa's services. Because Ruby is on the spectrum, she's entitled to benefits from our state, including care. The agency I work with pays Tessa. I'm not involved in that process. Update, I appreciate everyone's valuable insight into the situation. I've seen a few comments hinting to me about the fact that I don't support my daughter's reading habit. Please know this is definitely not the case. We are both big readers and frequent patrons of our local library. I'm always supportive of Ruby getting new books. I talked to Tessa and told her that I appreciate her for thinking of Ruby, apologized for the misunderstanding and have paid her for the books. We had a chat about expectations in the future and I don't think this will happen again. I've also talked to Ruby and we agreed that I would hold on to the books and she would pay me for them as she wishes. It's important to me that Ruby learns how to handle her finances appropriately, and we decided that she will get 2 new books every week. She reads very quickly. After reading through your perspective on the matter, I agree that it's better in the long run to lose the money and salvage the relationship between the 3 of us, and had not considered all the implications of doing otherwise. Lesson learned. And the next one is titled Douchebag Neighbor. This might be long but worth the read, I think. Spec home built with a $12 million budget and a 6-month schedule. Next door neighbor immediately qualifies as a complete dickhead. Knows everybody including the principals of the company I work for. At the very beginning of the work he asks for a row of redwood trees to be planted as screening between the properties. Principals grant his request as a good neighbor gesture, $31K. Every step of the project he either stands out at the end of the driveway taking pictures or he's flying his drone over the lot. He starts asking questions about whether or not work in progress is covered under the permit. He confides that he has obtained a copy of the permit and a set of plans. One day, he asks us for a meeting to discuss the redwood trees. Yes, those trees. He comes over at the appointed time and introduces his wife's landscape architect. Famous guy apparently, and he tries pulling some muscle moves by trying to convince us that the redwood trees are stealing their water. They also don't fit his vision for the project they are considering, which will be a total site and backyard makeover with walkways, stone walls, fountains, etc. He wants mature oak trees instead. cut down and remove the redwoods at our expense, and plant new oak trees also at our expense because, you know, screening. We decline, which sends famous architect guy and the wife into a rage. They decide to move forward with their project anyway, and the major earth moving, concrete forming, irrigation, etc. are all getting placed. Mr. Drone Guy continues to make efforts to get the oak trees swapped in under threats that maybe some of the work we are doing is not covered under the permit. Seems he also acted as the GC for his own remodel, so he must really know what he's talking about. He sends emails, registered letters from his lawyer, all in an effort to get us to swap out the trees. Finally, we are within sight of completing our project, and from the second floor we can see that they have really transformed their whole yard into little parklets with mature plantings and walkways and all the other stuff. It's impressive, to be honest. So I called the town for a courtesy inspection prior to final, and the next day the inspector, an old friend whose father is also an old friend, stops by to tour the property for any red flags. I save the best for last, and we make it upstairs and make it to the best possible viewing point of the neighbor's magnificent landscape project, and my inspector friend casually but loudly says, "What the hell is that? I've never seen a permit come through for all that." And he bounds downstairs and heads back to the office, I'm guessing, to pull files. Here comes the best part though. Through abutting property searches that we always perform as due diligence, we discovered that the neighbor's side yard in its entirety is an 80-foot wide utility easement for the single largest underground water aqueduct for the entire region. It cannot be built on. We kept mum. Now, because there's also a seasonal creek that crosses said easement, Fish and Game are notified of the work in progress. In addition, we now have the State Water Resources Board along with the major water utility company inspections and enforcement departments making inquiries along with the town building department. No permit application was ever submitted for any of the work Mr. Drone Guy had done. Oof. Our property sold, and during some modifications for the new owner, we watched with subdued glee as every stick and stone was removed from the offending area and was to be left in a natural state for eternity. Major fines were also levied. Or levied, I always forget how to pronounce that. Either way, OP really seems like a person you do not want to mess with. Major props. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I have seen stories here about crazy neighbors, but I think mine might take the prize for the most insane one. He had always seemed like he had a few screws loose in the past because he always liked to come out and yell at people for seemingly no reason. Sometimes it was just to insult how their property looked or even what they were wearing. From what I gathered after all of this, he did not actually have a mental illness or disability. He was simply just insane and did all of this knowing full well what he was doing. I knew this because based on what he ends up doing later in the story, he was forced to undergo a mental examination. I think at least I am going to label this guy as the worst neighbor in Bratislava, Slovenia. I think most places have the same kind of rule that people cannot just come on your property without permission. If you tell them to leave, they have to, or they can get arrested. One day, neighbor decided to come out of his house and onto my property to yell at me. He was going off about how my built-in sprinklers made the lawn look stupid and that it would cause his lawn to look bad in return. Then he started digging into how ugly the flowers my wife planted were. And by the way guys, sorry for my voice still sounding a little bit weird. I caught a nice little cold in Europe, so I hope I am better very soon. Either way, well, that was a little bit too far and my wife basically told him to F off and get away from us. That drove him even crazier and said that he was not going to leave the property, and before he did he was gonna make sure that he killed my wife. I made her get inside the house, lock the door and call the police. I had no idea what this guy was actually capable of, but I was not going to let him get near her no matter what. So finally the police arrived and let me into my house so they could talk to both of us away from the neighbor. We explained that he refused to leave the property and even threatened to kill my wife. You would think that this is the main part of the story and he goes to jail or something, but it actually isn't and things got even crazier. The police only sent 2 officers in a car and both were in the house with us. That meant the neighbor was outside unsupervised and he decided to do something even crazier. He had gotten some rope that I guess was in his garage and tied the police car to his own car.
When one officer looked out the window, he could see that their car was being dragged away by the neighbor. I have no idea what was going through his head, and it was probably the main reason he had to get a psych evaluation afterwards. The only thing I could gather him saying was that since he paid the tax dollars the police got, he deserved their car. So we all ran outside when we saw this, and it was clear the police were less concerned about him trespassing and more that he was taking their car and starting to go down the block. They told him to get out of the car, and honestly, I'm amazed that he listened to them. I would have expected him to keep going, knowing his history of not really being able to stop. You could tell the officers had never seen anything like this happen before, and called in for another unit just in case they needed some extra hands with this guy. When he got out of the car, nobody could tell until he got closer that he had a knife and started running towards the officer with it. This crazy guy was actually going to attack a police officer because he would not let him steal the car. He luckily did not manage to hurt anybody, and the other officer was able to quickly take out the taser and shoot the neighbor with it. Police here don't really pull out guns like in other parts of the world I've heard of. Anyway, he was on the ground and everybody was just looking at him very confused. Another police car came and they stuck him in the back of it to arrest him for attempted assault of a police officer. He was also being charged with attempting to steal a police car, trespassing and threatening with a deadly weapon. Since he did in fact have a knife, the threat he made against my wife was more serious than if he just said it. They knew because of his behavior they had to get him evaluated to see if he could even stand a trial. If he was mentally ill and not able to control himself or see right from wrong, they would not or could not send him to jail. They would probably send him to some kind of hospital to get the help he needed. I really thought that was going to be the case, but the results showed that he was perfectly fine. Even in court, it was like looking at a different guy because we had only seen him yelling and acting kind of crazy. He knew exactly what was going on and did not really have much of a defense when it came to the things that he had done. They found slight traces of drugs in his system, so there is a thought that maybe he had an altered state because of that. Either way, he was gonna be fully held responsible for what he did, and let me just tell you, messing with the police here is not a smart idea. Many people see them as heroes, and trying to stab one for no reason will not make you look very good. He was going to jail for the things he did with the officer and the car without a doubt. The real question came into what was going to happen when it came to the things that caused the police to get called in the first place. It never looks good when a larger man that had a weapon threatens a woman. They were dropping the trespassing because at this point it really did not matter. Instead, he was given 2 extra years in jail on top of the 5 he got from the assault and theft. There are 2 ways that courts can handle this when people are arrested for 2 separate things. They can either say that he can serve the 2 sentences at the same time, meaning he would only do 5 years and 2 of them would count for both crimes. Or instead he would have to do 7. They added them together and made him serve the 2 crimes separately. There might be crazier stories about neighbors out there, but I have yet to see one. Please let me know if you liked my story about my neighbor. I am mostly happy that he is in jail and hopefully not coming back to the neighborhood. It's peaceful without his yelling, and I hope that he can control himself in the future. I don't know if he needs to get help for drugs or just control himself better, but he has 7 years to figure that out. I have a feeling he will not be my neighbor when he gets out though.
And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.